back in the early 60s.
I really think it's always considered. I was just trying to say secrets.
And they were asking him to be a
Hi, I've been loving your old pictures you've been putting up.
All right, the big hands on the 12, little hands on the 7. So
elder
we will correct that.
gospel meeting at the Son of Black.
Thank you for coming. I am Dr. Tim McNeese. I chair the history department here. How many of you are from the York community tonight? Very good. That is very good. The rest of you from out of town, or just don't know where you're from? Is that, we're glad you are here. Unfortunately, it's fortunately and it's unfortunately. Yeah, the guy speaking here is yeah, I'll explain later. Depends on how you do. We are sad to say, and I'm sure you know already, that Dr. Zeiss, am I saying it correctly? Zeiss is not here tonight. There was family issues and health stuff going on, so he had to bail out on us. So fortunately, we're a college where we have people like Frank Wheeler, Dr. Wheeler, who can jump in at the last minute. So I'm supposed to introduce him, so I think I will. If I can find my notes here. I had them just, this is why I hate using these things for notes. I'll find it. There we go. Brandon, you got a paper copy of this in case I can't find it?
Make something up.
Well, I am going to make something up, probably. So, yeah. Frank and I have known each other since the early 70s, so we're those people. All right, here we go. Dr. Frank Wheeler is a native Nebraskan. He's from Sidney, Nebraska. His alma maters include York College, Harding University, Harding Graduate School of Religion, and he took his PhD from Baylor University. He has been at York College since 1988. So quick math says that's about 100 years or so. And he serves here as professor of Bible and Biblical Studies, and he also chairs the Bible department. He's married to Kathleen, originally Baker, in case you knew her back in those days. I did. And they have one son, Frank Jr. He lives with his wife, Marie, in Milwaukee. Frank, the cool thing about Frank is when summertime comes, he leaves town, which is not in and of itself a nice thing, but where he goes is cool, because he goes to Israel. He has participated in archaeological digs in Israel. How many summers? 10, 12? 14. He has worked with the University of Nebraska at Omaha at Bethsaida, Israel. And since 2004, that would be 14, wouldn't it? He has worked each summer with the University of Tel Aviv, Israel at a place called Tel Beth Shemesh. I'm going to bet you any amount of money that name will come up again before he's done. Frank is a real scholar. I admire him tremendously. He got here a few years before I did, so I assume he'll be here long after I'm gone. But anyway, he's going to be a real treat for you if you're interested in archaeology at all. I think he even has the Indiana Jones hat somewhere. I think he actually does. Yeah. But anyway. All right, Dr. Frank Wheeler, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. McNeese. I've been around so long, I tell my students I was born BC. Now they believe me. But students who are from Nebraska know what I'm talking about when I tell them I was born in Sydney. BC is before Cabela's, you see. But some of them even who don't know that think, yeah, it is BC. So, yeah, anytime I have a chance, opportunity to speak about some of my work in Israel, I appreciate it. And I hope that I don't bore you too much tonight, especially those of you who have heard some of this already. Now, I might adjust that just a little bit. Is that any better? I don't know, I'm getting kind of a ring back.
Is it loud enough?
Yeah, it's loud enough.
Is it okay for you? It's more than okay for me. But anyway, at Baylor, I was a graduate assistant for a professor who was an archaeologist. And every summer he tried to get me to go with him. I wanted to, I would have loved to, but I was a graduate student and I didn't have any money. And he would love to know that I have eventually made my way to Israel. He excavated in Israel as well. But that's something I had always wanted to do. And I've already talked tonight with someone whose sister wants to go. And it is available. These kinds of trips are available for anyone who wants to go. It has to be older than out of high school. I think most of our group here tonight would fit that. But anyway, as we go through this evening, I would like to do this as just a regular classroom. If you have questions, if you're like me, don't wait till the end, you'll forget it. Just let me know if there's something on the screen that you don't quite understand. Ask at that point so I can explain, or say I don't know either. But what I want to do is kind of give you an introduction to how archaeology works, what archaeologists do, and in doing that, I'm going to use some of my work at Beth Shemesh to kind of illustrate that, and we'll see how things go. We'll take a break a little later. If I'm not quite finished with this, then we'll come back and do more. I'm not going to give you the whole tour. I'm going to focus just on part of where we work. But I thought I'd title it, What's It All About? Or What It's All About. What's It All About is something else. Some of you may remember. Basically, a very simple definition of archaeology, simply we try to discover and preserve objects of the past. Those objects help us to learn how people lived. Archaeology is not a treasure hunt. It used to be, but not anymore. At least legitimate archaeology. We discover all kinds of things. Big things, little things, and even the little things are important because it helps us to understand how people lived. And as I say, that's kind of the focal point of what archaeology is all about. It can give us very detailed information. In fact, I was really impressed, I still am, with how detailed the records we keep. We spend a lot of time in the field, recording, and then when we get back to our camp where we're staying, we usually stay at a kibbutz. We spend hours meticulously going over those records, verifying them, re-recording them, and making sure that they're accurate. As I say, sometimes we look at archaeology as a treasure hunt. And Indiana Jones, kind of that whole series, has popularized that idea, but it really isn't. There was a time when it was a treasure hunt, and that's what people focused on. They wanted to find the big things, at which they did find some. But a lot of the little things, they ignored. Little things like pottery. They would ignore this because what they're looking for is like the Ark of the Covenant or the Ark itself. And, that's been found several times.
That's where
I can vouch for the fact that we have never chased any Nazis. Never been on trains chasing Nazis anyway. We've been on trains there. I like to describe archaeology like it's like a puzzle. Lots of little pieces. And when they come together, it's really a beautiful picture. They don't always fit together real well. But some of the pieces of that puzzle, we'll find bones, lots and lots of pottery. I'll explain a little more later. That helps us to date a particular site, the style of pottery that's at a given level. Stones, different kinds of stones. Texts, if we find texts, that's fantastic. Not many archaeological projects actually find texts. But when we do, that's really exciting. Sometimes you find artwork on pottery or some walls or something, tombs, different kinds of tools. Politics is a big thing, especially where I work in the Middle East. Politics sometimes can be very touchy, very difficult, and especially in Jerusalem, where you've got your Arab communities, your Jewish communities, your Christian communities, and the Jewish community thinks they own the whole city, but the Arab community says, no, you don't. They have to get special permission to dig in the Arab communities and all this kind of stuff. Lots of politics going on there that require a lot of careful work before they ever excavate. And then sometimes you get caught in situations where one side doesn't like the other side and they start firing at each other. You just keep your head down when that happens. Trash, I left the best to last. Think about what you throw away. What does that say about you? What we get rid of, what we just toss in the trash can, would give someone else who's looking through that a lot of information of who we are, what we do, what we like, all kinds of things. Trash is very important to archaeologists. And yes, we'll find these holes where they've just thrown stuff in, covered it up. It's their trash pit, basically. And those are extremely valuable because it tells us a whole lot about their culture, who's there, and all kinds of things. So hopefully all of these pieces of the puzzle will come together
On your bones,
and fit very nicely.
on your bones, is
Okay.
it also animal and human bones?
Both. Yep. And some sites will have, most sites will have more animal bones than human bones. But it's very similar to here. If you find human bones, you have to be very respectful, very careful. Especially with the Orthodox Jewish community, because they, just like the Native Americans here, it may be some of their ancestors. And we have to be very respectful of their ancestors, if it is their ancestors. But how do you know? You don't when you first find them. So with animal bones, certainly we have a lot more leeway, and I'll show you an example of some of that here in a few minutes. But sometimes these pieces of the puzzle fit together very nicely, but a lot of the times they just don't. And you've got a big old hole in your evidence. You don't know what goes there. You know what you'd like to have there, but you don't. And sometimes the picture is just not complete. Very seldom is the picture really complete, like this. One of the things that really has fascinated me with archaeology is all the different types of disciplines of study that come together in an archaeological project. There would be some even more than these, but certainly modern archaeology has branched out and included all kinds of different scientific disciplines. It used to be, as I was saying, just kind of a treasure hunt. You go, you dig, you look, and you find something great. You find something, you send it back to the British Museum. There's a statement saying there's more of ancient Egypt in the British Museum than Egypt. That may very well be true. But because of politics today, you know what's happening? You've heard it in the news.
Repatriation.
Egypt is saying, hey, that's our stuff. Send it back. Or other countries. Okay? What do you do with that? You know? It is theirs. Repatriation, whatever. But that's very difficult too, to try to solve that issue. Nevertheless, all kinds of things are going on at an archaeological dig. As we go through the evening, you'll see why I'm making this statement. We may dig for 4 weeks. On our project, we dig 4 weeks almost every summer. Some projects will only dig every other year because you gather enough data in just a few weeks to take to the labs, all different kinds of labs, and you'll spend a year or two just working through the data that you have, trying to figure out what all you have. And a lot of people think, okay, digging is what archaeology is all about. No, that's just the very beginning. Once you decide where to dig and you start digging, that's just step one. All the other stuff goes on behind the scenes involving all these kinds of things. We have our captain of the drone, and that's kind of been one of the more recent additions for a lot of archaeological projects, the drones. Photography with these is just amazing. We used to use helium balloons, cherry pickers that they bring out on a truck, and then, you know, you could only get so high with that, but you could also only get so close to where you're digging. And we've had to pull that out because it's gotten stuck in the soft soil and all that kind of stuff. But this is really amazing. But yeah, Indiana Jones is still around. He's ready for takeoff. Some of the techniques that are used, and I'm not even sure I can pronounce some of these, but it's amazing how much science and very technical kinds of science is used to determine all kinds of things. They're able now to tell us where a piece of pottery came from, because they've taken, I'll say, DNA samples of pottery from around, see the clay in the pottery. They know basically where that clay, what part of the world that has come from. They've done that much research, they've done that much analysis, and they can tell that kind of stuff.
It used to be just carbon 14 dating that was based
Yep.
on a lot of the stuff. Now we have
Yep.
everything else.
All kinds of things, yeah.
So where is carbon-14 dating today? Is it still used? Is it
Oh,
widely
yeah.
used?
Yeah, we use it every year.
Yeah, yeah.
Used a lot. Yeah. When we find olive pits, we find several in a pile. We collect them very carefully and send them to the lab for C14 testing. This past 2 summers ago, the very spot where I was digging, we found a couple of wooden beams that had been burned. So just charcoal.
Yeah.
You could follow it all across the square, how long it was and all of that. So we took several samples of that, sent to the lab. I haven't heard the results back. I'm sure our directors have. But yeah, the thing about that is, where we're working, and most archaeology in Israel and a lot of other places, going back to the early Middle Bronze, early Bronze,
Sure.
that's a very short span of time. So it's more accurate, you know, when you're just talking about 4,000, 5,000 years. It's going back much, much further where the debate kicks in, and the questions about its accuracy and all of that. Do you have anything to add to that, Terry?
It's good to about 2 half-lives, which is about 13,000 years.
Okay. Yeah, we're certainly within that framework now. In the Middle East, one of the most common sites is what we call a tell. It's a mound. And ancient cities would like to build on an elevated location. And as they would rebuild over the centuries because of natural disasters or fires or whatever, they would gradually be building up a little higher. And so you get this artificial mound. And this is down south, just west of the Dead Sea at Tel Arad. And then Tel Beersheba. This is a modern observation post. So you can just tell that this is not all that natural. It's gradually built up over the centuries. And where we dig here at Tel Beersheba, it's the same sort of thing. So as you dig down, you're starting at the most recent occupation level, and as you're going further down, you see different layers, and the further down you go, the earlier it is. It's gradually over the years. It's kind of like a cake. It builds up and you get different layers. Bet Shemesh is southwest of Jerusalem, about 20 kilometers or so, 12, 14 miles, something like that. And so I've been digging there since 2004. And then when I first started, it was up here, north of the Sea of Galilee at that site. And the University of Nebraska at Omaha, every now and then through the years, has had articles in the Omaha World Herald and such. You may have seen some of those. That's where I first got my start. But I got connected with some of the people at Bet Shemesh, so I thought I'd try that for a year and see how that went. And just really clicked off really well with the crew there. And Dr. Dale Manor, who was here a couple of years ago, was our speaker for this series. He and I have become really good buddies. Not only digging buddies, but traveling buddies too. We travel on the weekends, sometimes before the dig starts, and then after the dig is over. And we have just a lot of fun. Aerial view of where Bet Shemesh is. This is the area we'll focus on. This is several years old. I'm not able to do aerial photography myself. I have to depend on others, and this is the latest one I have. I've never seen Bet Shemesh like that. It's not green when I get there. I go middle of June through the middle of August, July, and it's already just as brown as can be by June. But I'll explain in a few minutes what's going on in this area and some of the other areas too. We've got a little map in a second. Here's our main crew. So that's the third project because earlier in the 20th century there were two other projects that worked there for a few years. And the main directors here, Shlomo Benimovitz and Zvi Letterman, both from the Tel Aviv, University of Tel Aviv, their archaeology department. They decided that there's a lot of research that had gone on in the early part of the 20th century at this site that was not very clear. The first archaeologist that worked there, McKenzie, did a very good job, but it wasn't very complete. The next person that came along, Elihu Grant, did a horrible job. He wasn't an archaeologist, and just left a lot of questions unanswered about the city of Bet Shemesh, who was there, how long it existed there, and all different kinds of things. And it's really in a very strategic location. And a lot of other archaeologists were saying somebody needs to go back and clarify some of these questions. So these two schoolmates decided, let's do that. And they've been working there since 1990. So it's one of the longer ongoing archaeological projects in Israel. Dr. Sean Google from Lethbridge University in Manitoba, Canada. She directs an archaeology program at Lethbridge University. So every summer she brings anywhere from 15 to 20, 25 archaeology students, which is really great to work with. We'll always have a few Israeli archaeology students from the University of Tel Aviv. One summer we had about 40. And Shlomo and Zvi said, no, this is way too many. Because we had a total of about 90 that summer. And this is a much smaller project. Some will have over 100 volunteers, 100, 120. But then they have a much larger crew. I mentioned Dr. Dale Manor just a moment ago. He teaches at Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas, one of our sister schools. And he was our featured speaker 2 years ago. And then this old guy here, since 2004. Okay, this is a map of the Tell, and the first archaeologist to work here was Mackenzie. His work is in the yellow. One of his main projects was he found a wall down here at the south gate and found a wall a couple of other places. One of his main projects was to trace that wall. You can see that he did. But the way that he did it, it's crazy. More than half of the way, he had people to tunnel underground alongside the wall. In fact, up here, you can still see some of the holes in the ground where some of the workers dug to get back to the wall. And when they first started excavating up in this area, they found some of their water canteens that dated back to the early 1900s, not the late Bronze era. But they tunneled and dug all the way around to map out that outer wall. It's a Middle Bronze wall, and it's amazing. Grant came along, and he didn't dig very long, but huge area. He was one of these treasure hunters. The more dirt you can move, the better for him. If he'd have had a backhoe, it would have really been dangerous. But he excavated a lot. What he did over here was he dug a huge trench and just threw the dirt over here. And then he filled it back up and dug more over here, putting it over there. And he just moved it on top of each other, where now that soil is so mixed up, there's no excavation there because you don't know what's what. Because layers, as I'll explain in a moment, are very important to archaeologists, keeping those layers defined. Where we've been working is up here in the gray and then around in this area. This gate down here is called the South Gate. It was first discovered by Mackenzie, but he didn't excavate the whole thing. And Shlomo and Steve wanted to go back and open that up again and clarify some things, and we found a couple of parts of the gate that he had not. So that was a lot of fun. And then over here, two things of note. One is the earliest, what's called a smithy, blacksmith, working there with iron. And it's one of the earliest ones in the Middle East. There's another one over in Jordan, about the same period of time. This goes back to the Iron Age, 1200 or 1000 BC or so. So 1800 BC. And then a house right here had a bowl. And I think Dr. Manner mentioned this a couple of years ago, you may remember, called the Kodesh bowl. The word Kodesh means holy. This was one of the Levitical cities in the Old Testament, suggesting there would have been priests here, Levites here. This is also the location where, when the Ark of the Covenant was sent back after the Philistines captured it, it ended here, or this was just across the border. The text says that some of the Levites went out and offered sacrifice. So Levites lived here. So that Kodesh bowl may very well have been from a house of one of the priests or the Levites stationed in this city. Okay, how do we dig? Several ways. One is called a box grid or checkerboard, literally. Looks like a checkerboard from the air. The site is divided into 2 meter squares, and you dig every other one. Every artifact is marked very carefully. Everything you find, every sliver of a bone, marked, recorded very carefully. And this is used especially with prehistoric sites and smaller sites. Dr. Sean Bubel, who I showed you her picture, in Canada, she has classes that she takes out, and they excavate different kill sites, buffalo kill sites from Native American tradition and so forth. And they record absolutely everything. We're not quite that detailed, but 2 meter squares. Keep that in mind. Another is just dig a test trench, several feet deep, a few feet long, a few feet wide, and it's exactly what it says. You're testing to see if there's anything there. They do this often when they want to, there's a construction going on, they want to just do a quick test dig to see if there's anything around. There are also more extensive digs like that. I'll show you in just a second. But it's very quick just to see if there's anything they need to be concerned about. In Israel, any construction work, here we have to get a license. Well, there they do too. But there, the first thing that happens is an archaeologist goes out. And they do test dig to see, okay, is there anything here? And if you want to build a garage, you've got to have a test site, the site tested by archaeologists to see if there's anything there that's going to cover up. Just think about it. In Jerusalem, how much history is there? Or anywhere near Caesarea, or Tiberias to the north. So any kind of construction project, you have to do that. If you don't, you may end up in jail. And they take it very seriously. It's their history. Another method is called sondage, where you dig sideways down the till. Instead of going up and digging down, you dig kind of sideways right into the till. Like you're taking a bite out of it. And what you're doing there is you're trying to get a view of the different layers in the soil all at once, rather than gradually going down from the top in just one small area. Here's an example at Beersheba, and as they were digging into it, look at what they found. The city wall, right here. They didn't know where it was. They figured there was a city wall there, and so as they did on the side, that's what they're doing. They found it. Another most popular method today is called the Wheeler-Pinion method. That's not me. Sir Mortimer Wheeler was a British archaeologist, and Kathleen Kenyon. They worked together developing this. Sir Mortimer Wheeler was the first one to really develop it. She was kind of his graduate student and assistant. They were working together in India where they developed this. What they do, they divide the site into 5 meter squares. Okay, prehistoric sites, 2 meter squares. Here we do 5 meter squares, and other places too around the world have adopted this method. Divided by walls, artificial walls, we call them balks, that are anywhere from 1 to 1.5, some have 2 meter walls there. And those,
thick?
pardon?
Is it a meter thick wall?
You leave that in place. What that does, it helps us to identify layers in the soil. Just imagine as you're digging down, the face of the block is going to tell you the different layers in the soil. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Some of those layers are fairly thick and some are very thin. And you've got to be looking out for those. You don't always see them as you're digging. But once you've dug and you can see it on the block, the different layers, it becomes very obvious. And that becomes very important. And also, leaving it that thick, one, if it's a long-term project, it doesn't crumble as easily. If it were only, half a meter thick, it would deteriorate much more quickly over time. But those layers help us identify the time periods. I'll have some examples. This is an aerial shot of where we are. And as you can see, those are not all 5-meter squares. They used to be. But as you're digging down, one, if you get too far deep, you have to, by law, the Israeli Antiquity Authority is our law over there. They're commissioned by the state, by the government. They have their own police force and all this kind of stuff. But they come around and they inspect. And if you have a dangerous situation, well, then you can be cited. And if you have too many of those citations, then you can lose your license to dig. For every project, you have to get a license to dig from the IAA, Israel Antiquities Authority. And if you don't have that license, well, then you're digging, you'd be put in jail. Again, very serious work for them. This is their history, their culture, their heritage. Well, all of these were at one time 5-meter squares. These still are in this road. But what happens is we'll be digging and then we'll find maybe a wall and we'll leave the balk intact for a while, but gradually as we keep digging down, if it gets too deep, then we have to take that balk down further. And sometimes we just move it out completely because of what we're finding. And we excavate, as in here, a very large area altogether. But these squares help us in our record keeping because each square is numbered on a grid. B23, B24, and so forth. And then C23, C24, and all that sort of thing. We know where each square is located, and in each square, we identify artifacts according to how far away from the balk they are. And the balks give us a lot of helpful information. These are just some of the things that we have found in this particular area. I'm going to focus on some of that a little bit later and explain several of these that have become very important in our history there at the site, telling us, okay, what's going on here? And some of the questions we still cannot answer. How did this get there? Some of the most least expected things we have found. At the foot of our site, right down here, is a Bedouin family, and he's our night watchman. He only lives here part of the year when the weather starts turning cold. I know that sounds kind of crazy. This is southwest of Jerusalem, but when the weather starts turning cold, he moves south, down around Beersheba, which is much more desert. This is not desert here, but I've never been there in the winter, but I doubt that it ever gets below 50, maybe 45. 45, they think they're going to die. And it's too cold, so he moves south. This family and 2 other families. He has 3 wives. He says he does not want all 3 wives in the same tent. He learned that from his dad. When I first started going here, his father lived here. And something I still trying to figure out. One year we went back and his father wasn't anywhere around. So we asked him, where's your dad? Oh, he's retired. Bedouin retires. You know that? He sold his sheep, sold his goats, and he's retired. Probably sold them to his son. But nevertheless, it's kind of neat to watch. When his father was there, they invited all of us down to watch his wife bake bread and some other things. But the son doesn't want us guys around. They've invited the ladies on the crew down to watch his wife bake bread and all that, but he doesn't want us guys around his wife. Okay, I've talked about the layers. This is the kind of thing that you find in a tell. Gradually over the years it builds up, and you find all kinds of things as you're digging down. Sometimes you'll find walls of buildings, pits, trash pits, all kinds of interesting things in there that people throw away. And then sometimes city walls are much larger, and on each layer, all different kinds of things. Pottery is very important because through the centuries, people have changed the style of pottery that they like to use. Sometimes it's for just developing a better style that's more practical or a little prettier maybe. And just through the centuries, just like, with our glassware, plateware, silverware, over the decades, they change. I tell my students, next time you're at your grandparents' house, look at what kind of plates they have. And then go back home. Most students aren't even going to think about this kind of stuff. See what kind of plates you eat off of. Most times they're going to be rather different. Or glasses, or pitchers. Okay, it's the very same thing here. So as we are digging down, we're going to find different kinds of styles of pitcher, pitchers, bowls, lamps, oil lamps here, than what we'll find here. And it's the same in every tell. And what they do, they compare the same styles of pitchers and bowls and oil lamps from tell to tell, and they may be at different levels on their tell, but it's from the same period of time. And that's kind of how they date. That plus the layers on the block as we're going down, plus things like carbon-14 dating, other sorts of things. There are several different ways to date where we're digging, at what level. This is one of the most accurate. Speaking of layers,
As you're looking through the tell and finding these artifacts, do you ever find anything that's wooden?
Mostly it's charcoal. By that time, it's been burnt. When you're talking about 1800 BC, 2000 BC, you don't find much, just regular wood. But if it's been burnt, sometimes it's preserved a little better. But it's not in its original form. So it depends on the situation. There have been in some places wood from ancient times discovered, but I don't think we have here, but I recall anyway. Okay, this picture gives the idea that sometimes these layers are often fairly thick. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're not. I have another picture. You can see here, found several different layers through here. And Sean spent a whole day doing this and very carefully taking samples and identifying what each sample, or not what it is, she didn't know at the time, but marking each one, labeling it, little plastic bags and such. And we thought we found a gold mine. Didn't know exactly what all it was. I'll tell you later.
Can you repeat again what causes the layers? Like when you clean your house, you get it out?
Different things. Sometimes it's natural disasters. See, these are, for the most part here, and a lot of other places, mud brick houses. So if you get a really bad storm, your house may have problems. After any rainstorm, you're going to have to repack the bricks. They're dried, not always heated, sometimes just heated by the sun, dried by the sun. And certainly on the roof, you're going to have to repack that and all that kind of stuff. But sometimes with fires, inadvertent fires, accidents, you just kind of push everything in, and like we do today, smooth it out, start building on top. And so that's going to be a whole level. And if a fire happens to catch, there may be several houses. Even though they're mud brick houses, they have enough things that are combustible around that fires can spread, especially if there's a wind. Have thatched roofs for the most part. That catches fire, well, that's going to go up in a hurry, spread very easily. So there's always wind blowing, sand, dust. Over the centuries, that just kind of builds up. And so gradually, it's any number of things. This particular site was destroyed a couple of times. We're not exactly sure who did it. And I'll show you some evidence of it. And so after that, they smoothed it out and built again. So it's a number of things. Some of the tools, you're familiar with most of these. I'll show you some examples. But dental picks, talk about patience. I spent whole days doing nothing but digging with a dental pick. It's fascinating. It's great. My wife says it drives her crazy. Well, it's what you're working on. It's really. Okay, here's some hand picks, trowels, square trowel, just a dustpan. All the soil that we dig out, we put in these buckets. And depending on where you are and what you're finding, you may sift every single bucket before you dump it out. Or normally we just sift 1 out of 5. But if we happen to find something that we want to see if there's more of it around, it may be that we're finding a couple, 3 or 4 olive pits in a particular area. We'll go back and we'll sift every bucket that we took out of that if we haven't already done it, looking for those olive pits, because those are extremely important. We'll see 14 dating back and confirm the dating that we've decided based on the pottery. So you've got a lot of correlation there. This is Toria, is what it's called. But anyway, those are some of the things. Did you notice I had even a backhoe? I'll show you an example in a minute. This is where we store them during the season. We have a real fancy system here. It's just it's a container, and we've got a lot of stuff we pack in there. We have to pack it very carefully. And again, we have a very fancy way of getting it from the container down to the site. So at 5 a.m. every morning, we're out here unpacking this, and we have to have flashlights because it's still too dark to see all in there. But we want to be able to start as soon as it gets light enough to see. We want to be done by 1 o'clock or so because it's already getting pretty hot. And we're not done for the day. We're done out here. When we get back to the caboose, we've got all kinds of record-keeping details, cleaning of artifacts, cleaning of bones, pottery, all kinds of stuff.
Could you describe the caboose?
Caboose is kind of an Israel tradition. Starting, I know they started in after World War II. I think they had some even before. But it became a really big deal after World War II, where a lot of families come together and they'll buy a big old lot of ground. They'll build houses and often just a common cafeteria. And they may have a farm. They farm together. Excuse me. One caboose we stayed on had a big dairy. They sold milk. That was one of their main things. A lot of their people would drive into town to work, but they had to pay so much every month, to live there and all this. And we ate in their cafeteria. And where we stay, usually on these caboose, they have it's kind of like a little area that's a cheap motel. And there's 3 or 4 of us in a room. And we'll have a shower, bathroom, bunk beds. That's about it. Not very large at all. Air conditioning, we do have that, which is important.
I was wondering that.
Yeah. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. They've gone into town or stopped in town on the way back by a fan because our air conditioner wasn't working. But that's what it is. It's kind of a community. And they're kind of going out of style these days. There's not as many as there used to be, but that's where our directors try to get us to stay somewhere at a caboose every summer. Some stay at just regular motels, not the big fancy hotels, but more like Hotel 6 or something like that. But we haven't done that yet. There's our chancellor. For breakfast, we had breakfast out at the hotel. Most of us will eat a little snack before we leave, because we get up about 4. We eat about between 8 and 9. And my body says, no, you got to have something before 9 o'clock if you get up at 4 o'clock, especially if you're working. So Dale and I will buy stuff at the grocery store when we're in town. And usually my breakfast is, probably shouldn't tell you this, peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a glass of orange juice. Probably ought to do without the jelly, but that's still, I work it off, believe me, I work it off before breakfast. We have other tools like the total station, and what this does, it helps us to identify, not only when we find these artifacts, we mark them, longitude, latitude, altitude. This does it all in digital fashion. Downloads it into a computer once we get back to the caboose. And they've developed a really neat program where you can mark all of your artifacts in a 3D model. And you can actually see where all your artifacts have been found in that part of the square. And it's really cool. Rescue archaeology is another style of archaeology that's done. This is for a larger area than just the test trench. If you're building, someone's just building a house, then they'll do a few test trenches. Okay, this is much larger. Larger buildings, apartment houses, those kinds of things, or shopping malls, and road construction. Excuse me. Highway 38 goes right by our hotel into the modern city of Bet Shemesh. The modern city of Bet Shemesh is, I've never seen a city grow as quickly as it has. It has multiplied several times over just since I've been going, since 2004. They don't just build a housing project, they build a whole community. South Bet Shemesh, west Bet Shemesh. And we're talking 40, 50 high-rise apartment buildings. And it's expanding because a lot of people are moving out of Jerusalem. Jerusalem's getting too expensive to live in. So a lot of them are moving out. And Bet Shemesh is a very popular place because it's not that far from Jerusalem. So Highway 38 gets traffic jams all the time. Morning, noon, night. So they're trying to expand the highway. This is the highway. This is our hotel over here. This is what they have done just since this past April. The Israel Antiquities Authority is responsible for this. And they're responsible for doing this kind of archaeology because what they're doing, they want to not only expand the highway, but they're going to level it out because it goes, it's hard to tell right here, but it comes up, it's a pretty steep hill here, and then it goes down very steep over here. They want to level that out, so they're going to be digging down right through here, about 15 meters. So to do that, you've got to see, is there anything there? Especially with it being this close to the ancient city of Bet Shemesh. And look at what they have found. Square after square after square, they've found all kinds of things in here. I'll show you a close-up of some of them. A lot of them, they didn't find anything. But eventually, they'll just cover all that up. Actually, they'll be digging a lot of it out through here with these huge earth-moving machines and such. This past summer, we didn't dig at our project, not for this reason, but for other reasons, but it's probably a blessing because Zvi, one of our co-directors, spent the whole summer out here every day. He was probably bugging him to death. He wasn't part of the project, but they knew he was working right over here, and he wanted to know what's going on. And one of the fascinating things is we've not, over in this area, discovered a whole lot of what we call level of Iron Age 1. This seems to be mostly Iron Age 1. And it's almost like this is Eastern Tel Bet Shemesh. And we're on Western Tel Bet Shemesh. We had no idea this was here. In fact, Mackenzie, the first archaeologist that dug here at Bet Shemesh, had his dig house. He actually built a stone dig house for his office. He had it right here. It was about 6 feet higher than where this is. But that's where he dug because the old road came across through here, just where the modern highway is, and they'd go over here and dig. We didn't want it right there in the middle of everything. But Zvi is just overwhelmed at what all they have found here. It's probably good we weren't digging because he'd have been going back and forth, just driven him crazy, as well as all of us. We'd want to see what's going on over here. Yeah.
Hey, what's usually the biggest loss with rescue archaeology or salvage archaeology? What normally don't you get because of the nature of the beast?
They don't take the time to record everything that they find. And they are in such a hurry digging because you've got the highway department saying, when's that going to be finished? You know, you told us it'd be finished by such and such date, and you're still digging. What's the problem here? And it's a rush job is what it is. You find a lot that you might not have ever found, but you lose a lot. And you probably don't ever even know about you.
Can the site trump the highway? Is there something they can find and say, well, you can never dig here or build here because this is too important?
It's a
Is that
possibility,
possible? Okay.
depending on what they find. And Israel is respectful of that.
Okay.
If they were to find something huge, tremendous significance, then they might say, okay, well, let's see if we can't reroute the highway just a little different.
So if they found the Ark of the Covenant, they'd probably reroute the highway.
If they found the Ark of the Covenant, I'm sure they would.
What I heard.
Okay, this is where our tell is. This is the highway I was just showing you. All those squares I showed you are right here. It's from a different side. This is from the south, the other's from the north. But back, this tree, that's kind of a landmark there. That's that tree right there. And it goes on down the hill. They've done some on this side as well. I don't have a picture of that, but it's really amazing. They found a lot of olive oil installations. Olive oil, in the Iron Age especially, was quite a commodity here, and further west as well. The Soric Valley is right along here. I'll show you pictures of that in a minute. But perfect place to grow olives, grapes, and still they have vineyards in this valley. But that's what these are. These are stones to press the olives. So let's take just a short break and come back and talk about, okay, how does archaeology relate to the Bible? What do we do with it? They're different perspectives. So let's take about 5 or 7 minute break or something. It's almost 8 o'clock. Restrooms are around the